Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here with another punk rock politics video blog. And before we get into today's subject matter, I'd like to thank the good people over at musiccitysigns.com for providing me a printout of the backdrop I designed a couple of months ago. No longer will I have to sit in front of my 50-inch television projecting this and then cropping out what I don't want. I have an actual physical background. So thanks again so much, fellas. Go check them out over at musiccitysigns.com. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, today I would like to discuss in detail the recent revelations from the Associated Press on human experimentation that took place in this country that has only now been revealed. Most of these experiments have really been relegated in history to Nazis and other tyrannical governments. But anybody who's listened to my show or seen some of my past work knows that I've talked about things like Artichoke, MK Ultra, the Tuskegee experiment where they gave black men syphilis and let them suffer. But folks, these revelations are on another level. These ones involved disabled people, the elderly, ill patients in Brooklyn hospitals, and even mentally retarded children. I know it sounds unbelievable. I know it sounds horrific. But there are in-depth articles, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages long out there from this study by the Associated Press, whether it be the Daily Mail, MSNBC, Fox News. You didn't see it on the actual news programs, but if you went to the websites, there were these in-depth reports. So let's go over these experiments one by one and discuss their importance. In 1942, the U.S. government, the federal government, commissioned experiments in which they injected a flu vaccine into male patients at the state asylum in Michigan, then gave them the flu. Now, this experiment was actually co-authored by Dr. Jonas Salk. Now, anybody who knows anything about history, this is the guy who came up with the polio vaccination. Now, why is this important? Well, what a lot of people don't understand about the polio vaccination is from 1955 to 1963, they used SV40 in this vaccine. What is SV40? Well, it is simian virus 40, a live cancer virus. There are numerous reports out there of people actually winning million-dollar lawsuits of people being injected with live cancer. But don't trust Jason Bermas. Go look it up yourself. Now, during studies in the 1940s that were also federally funded, they thought it would be okay to inject mental patients in Middletown and Norwich, Connecticut with hepatitis, folks. And the main doctor behind this was Dr. W. Paul Havens Jr., who was also behind and an expert for the World Health Organization, a known eugenics operation, a known population control device. Unbelievably, during this time period, 11 public service employee volunteers, people who weren't even being paid and had no idea what was about to happen to them in Minnesota, were injected with malaria and then starved for 5 days to see what the effects would be. They were also, in some cases, subjected to hard labor. Folks, this is appalling and disgusting and needs to be a piece of history that is explored further and expanded upon in the public consciousness. In 1957, Maryland prisoners were injected with flu virus nasally. Now, why am I discussing this now? Well, over the past couple of years, it has now become commonplace that people get vaccinated from the flu. How? Not only by injection, but through their nasal passages. So we should be taking a look at this experiment as well. Now, moving on, it's important to understand that during the 40s and 50s, we saw a huge growth in big pharma and the healthcare industry, accompanied by a boom in what? experimentation on prisoners. Now, not all of these people, and by the way, this is funded with our federal dollars. Often the case, the taxpayer are the ones working for these corporations. And these weren't always done on murderers or lifers. I mean, some of these people were actually spending 7 to 12 years in prison. Can you imagine being a human guinea pig in that type of situation? Right now, in fact, over 60% of this experimentation that we're seeing is overseas because they can't use prisoners in this country anymore. It came out that in 1963, researchers injected cancer cells into elderly patients in Brooklyn just to see how fast they would expand and what these patients would basically experience from them. Would they end up dying from this cancer that they injected, or would they be dying from the chronic illness they were in the hospital for in the first place? Now this one just takes it over the top. From 1963 to 1966, yes, for 3 years, mentally retarded children were injected with hepatitis. Folks, this is just unbelievable. What a dark period in this nation's history. You see, it was through hearings in 1973 on Big Pharma and this experimentation in front of Congress that essentially ended a lot of experimentation in this country. And during those hearings, they actually had to admit, Big Pharma had to admit, that the reason they were doing this is because it was cheaper to experiment on prisoners than chimpanzees. Now obviously, I think it's extremely important to note that these things don't come out until 40 and 50 years later. So God knows what they're actually doing to people in this country today. But as I stated before, a lot of this stuff has moved overseas, and that's why in our final look at these types of experiments, we're going to go to Nigeria, where recently Pfizer paid out a $75 million payment to Nigerian officials after their drug Trovan allegedly, and I have to say allegedly because with this $75 million they bought silence and no wrongdoing. That's right, there was no wrongdoing, but they gave $75 million to Nigerian officials when 11 children taking Trovan ended up dying. And then the article goes on to say scores of others were crippled. Were crippled, folks. Well, that wraps it up. I encourage you to go see the mainstream articles out there and go check out my stuff over at facebook.com/JasonBermas and youtube.com/JasonJustice911. Thank you all.